Cops target black man for trespassing on his own property, not knowing he was the FBI asterisk. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when Marcus Green, a tall, sharp-looking black man in his late 30s, pulled into the driveway of his brand-new suburban home after returning from a week-long business trip, dressed casually in a plain t-shirt and jeans. He was looking forward to some quiet time, but as he unlocked the front door with his own keys, a police cruiser rolled up slowly and stopped at the curb. Two officers stepped out, hands resting on their holsters, their eyes scanning him with suspicion. "Sir, this is private property," one of them said sharply, ignoring the keys in his hand. Marcus, frowning slightly, replied, "I know because it's my property." His calm words seemed to make no difference. The officers exchanged a doubtful glance, and one muttered into his radio, "Possible trespasser, black male claiming to be the homeowner." In moments, backup was called, and Marcus could feel eyes on him as curious neighbors peeked from behind blinds and over fences. He explained that he had just moved in a month ago and had the deed and identification inside, but the officers didn't let him go near the door. One of them ordered him to step back with his hands visible, his tone dripping with disbelief. Marcus knew exactly what was going through their minds. It wasn't about property rights. It was about the assumption that a man who looked like him couldn't possibly own a house in this neighborhood. He felt the sting of insult, but his years of training taught him to keep his voice level and his movements controlled. When one officer smirked and said, "You really expect us to believe you live here?" Marcus's patience thinned. Without raising his voice, he reached into his back pocket, moving slowly so there would be no misunderstanding, and pulled out a black leather badge case. Flipping it open, the late afternoon sun glinted off the golden FBI shield. "Special Agent Marcus Green," he said, his tone steady but commanding. "And you are currently detaining a federal officer without cause on his own property." The smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a look of panic. The second officer stepped back, his face draining of color. The radios fell silent. A neighbor gasped loud enough for everyone to hear. Marcus didn't stop there. He pulled out his phone, started recording, and told them plainly, "This video will be forwarded to Internal Affairs. Your department will be hearing from my office first thing Monday morning." The officers stumbled over apologies, calling it a misunderstanding, but the damage was already done. Marcus didn't respond, simply stared until they backed away toward their cruiser, retreating under the weight of the humiliation they had brought on themselves. As the patrol cars finally rolled away, the street fell silent. Marcus stepped into his home, locked the door behind him, and stood for a moment in the quiet. It wasn't just a personal win. It was a reminder that the truth, backed by authority, can turn a moment of prejudice into a lesson that won't be forgotten. Marcus Green had just returned from a grueling, week-long business trip, eager to enjoy the peace of his brand-new suburban home, when the quiet street was suddenly disrupted by the slow roll of a police cruiser pulling up to the curb. Dressed in a plain t-shirt and jeans, he was unlocking his front door with his own keys when two officers stepped out, their hands resting casually but deliberately on their holsters, eyes locked on him with suspicion. "Sir, this is private property," one of them stated with an authoritative edge, completely ignoring the keys in his hand. Marcus turned, a puzzled frown crossing his face. "I'm aware it's my property," he replied evenly, his voice steady but tinged with disbelief at the situation unfolding. His calm explanation seemed to bounce right off them as they exchanged a quick glance, and one officer muttered into his radio, "Possible trespasser, black male, claiming to be the homeowner." Almost instantly, the air grew heavier as the sound of distant sirens began to echo through the neighborhood, backup already on its way. Neighbors' blinds tilted open, faces pressed against the glass, some already holding their phones up to record. Marcus took a slow breath and tried again, telling them he had closed on the house just a month ago and that his deed and ID were inside. But they cut him off, ordering him to step away from the door and keep his hands where they could see them. The words carried the unmistakable tone of distrust. And when one officer smirked and asked, "You really expect us to believe you live here?" the meaning was clear. It wasn't about a property dispute. It was about the fact that a black man in this neighborhood was being judged as out of place. Years of discipline and training kept Marcus from reacting with anger, though inside he felt the sharp sting of the insult. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his back pocket not for a weapon, but for a black leather badge case. The click of the snap opening was followed by a flash of gold as the FBI shield caught the afternoon sun. "Special Agent Marcus Green," he said, his tone quiet, but carrying the kind of weight that could silence a room. "You are currently detaining a federal officer without cause on his own property." The smirk on the first officer's face evaporated, replaced by a look of dawning panic, while the second officer instinctively stepped back, his posture shifting from aggression to retreat. The neighborhood, still watching, seemed to freeze. In place, Marcus calmly pulled out his phone and began recording, telling them that the footage would be sent to Internal Affairs and that their department would be hearing from his office by Monday morning. Stammered apologies spilled out, but Marcus said nothing further, holding their gaze until they retreated to their cruiser. As the patrol cars pulled away, the street fell silent again, leaving Marcus to step inside, lock his door, and reflect on how swiftly truth and authority could turn an act of prejudice into a lesson. Those officers would not soon forget. Marcus Green had just pulled into the driveway of his new suburban home after a long week away, his shoulders easing at the thought of finally relaxing when a police cruiser slowed to a stop at the curb. Still in his jeans and plain t-shirt, he walked to the front door with his own keys in hand. But before he could turn the lock, two officers stepped out of the car, eyes narrowing, hands resting on their holsters. Spoke sharply, "Sir, this is private property," as though Marcus didn't belong there at all. Marcus turned, his brow tightening. "I'm aware it's my property," he replied evenly, holding up the keys as proof. But his calm words were met with a quick glance between the officers and a muttered call over the radio. Possible trespasser, black male, claiming to be the homeowner. The sound of those words settled into the air like a weight, and within moments, the distant hum of backup sirens began to grow. Neighbors started appearing behind half-drawn blinds, some with phones raised to record. Marcus tried to explain that he had closed on the house just a month ago and could show the deed and his identification inside. But his words were cut short by one officer ordering him to step back from the door and keep his hands where they could be seen. The tone wasn't just procedural lit, dripped with disbelief. And when the other officer smirked and said, "You really expect us to believe you live here?" Marcus felt the sting of the insult cut deeper than the accusation itself. Dealt with prejudice before, but being suspected of trespassing on his own property was a new level of absurdity. Years of discipline kept him from reacting with visible anger, but the decision formed in his mind instantly. Moving slowly and deliberately so there would be no mistake, he reached into his back pocket not for anything threatening, but for a black leather badge case. The faint snap of it opening broke the tension, and the gold FBI shield inside caught the late afternoon sunlight. "Special Agent Marcus Green," he said, his voice steady but carrying undeniable authority, "and you are currently detaining a federal officer without cause on his own property." In that instant, the smirk vanished from the first officer's face, replaced by a flash of panic, while the second officer's eyes widened and his body shifted back an inch, as if the ground beneath him had changed. At the radios that had been crackling a moment ago went silent. Somewhere across the street, a neighbor gasped loud enough for everyone to hear. Marcus didn't raise his voice or move closer, yet the weight of his presence now filled the space. Pulling out his phone, he began recording, telling them calmly that the footage would be sent to Internal Affairs and that their department would hear from his office on Monday morning. The officers stumbled through awkward apologies, but Marcus only watched them until they backed away to their cruiser, leaving the street in a stunned, heavy silence. Marcus Green had just returned from a demanding week away, his mind set on finally enjoying a peaceful afternoon in his brand-new suburban home. When the sound of tires crunching against the curb drew his attention, a police cruiser had pulled up slowly, its presence heavy and deliberate. Dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, Marcus walked toward his front door with his keys in hand. But before he could fit the key into the lock, two officers stepped out of the vehicle, their eyes fixed on him with a sharp, assessing glare. One spoke with a clipped tone, declaring, "Sir, This is private property." As though he had been caught in the act of breaking in, Marcus turned to face them, holding up his keys as proof and replying evenly, "I'm aware it's my property." His words seemed to do nothing but deepen their suspicion. They exchanged a glance, and one officer pressed a button on his radio, calling in possible trespasser, black male, claiming to be the homeowner. The words hit the air like an accusation carved in stone. And within seconds, the faint but unmistakable sound of sirens began to echo in the distance. From behind drawn blinds and cracked open front doors, neighbors began to watch, some already lifting their phones to record. Marcus, aware of the tension rising, explained that he had closed on the house just a month ago and could produce both the deed and his identification if allowed to step inside. But instead of listening, they ordered him to move away from the door and keep his hands visible. The skepticism in their tone was unmistakable, and when one of them smirked and asked, "You really expect us to believe you live here?" Marcus felt the insult land harder than the accusation itself. He had faced prejudice before, but this was a direct challenge to his right to exist in his own space. Years of training kept his anger in check, his voice steady, and his movements measured. In one deliberate motion, he reached into his back pocket not for anything threatening, but for a black leather badge case. The soft snap as it opened revealed a golden FBI shield that caught the late afternoon light. "A special green," he said, his voice calm yet carrying undeniable authority. "And you are currently detaining a federal officer without cause on his own property?" The smirk dissolved instantly from the first officer's face, replaced by a look of dawning panic, while the second officer took a subtle step back. The radios that had been crackling with chatter went dead silent, and a sharp gasp from a neighbor cut through the stillness. Without raising his voice, Marcus pulled out his phone and began recording, stating plainly that the footage would be sent to Internal Affairs and that their department would be hearing from his office on Monday morning. The officer stumbled through weak apologies, but he said nothing more, holding their gaze until they retreated to their cruiser. When they finally drove away, the street returned to silence, leaving Marcus to step inside, lock the door, and reflect on how quickly truth and authority could turn an act of prejudice into a moment those officers would never forget.